Medical station Kepler 442b had all the charm of a sterile coffin floating in the void, which was exactly what the Galactic Medical Coalition had ordered when they commissioned it. Nothing says neutral medical facility quite like architecture that could double as a mausoleum, complete with the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they were already halfway to whatever afterlife their species believed in. The morning shift bell chimed with all the enthusiasm of a dying walrus, and she rolled out of her bunk with the practiced grace of someone who had mastered the art of vertical resurrection. 6 standard years of working the graveyard shift on a station that treated everyone from blob-like gelatinoids to crystalline silicates had taught her that the universe's idea of medical emergencies rarely coincided with convenient timing. Coffee, or what the replicators insisted was coffee, though she suspected it was actually recycled coolant, with delusions of grandeur, steamed in her mug as she reviewed the night's incident reports. 3 cases of cosmic radiation poisoning from rookie pilots who thought shields were optional, 1 unfortunate tentacled harmonizer who had gotten tangled in their own appendages during a musical performance, and the usual collection of beings who had discovered that just because you could eat something didn't mean you should. The medical bay hummed with the kind of efficiency that made her both proud and slightly disturbed. Automated systems handled the routine cases while she focused on the more creative challenges, like explaining to a rock-based life form why they couldn't simply grow a new arm, or convincing an energy being that downloading malware was not, in fact, a legitimate medical complaint. Proximity alert in Cargo Bay 7, the station's AI announced, in a tone that managed to be both helpful and condescending. Unscheduled arrival detected. She paused mid-sip. Cargo Bay 7 had been decommissioned for 3 cycles after an unfortunate incident involving explosive spores and a sanitation droid with authority issues. Nothing should be arriving there, scheduled or otherwise. The lift hummed as it carried her toward the abandoned section, passing through layers of the station that grew progressively more neglected. Emergency lighting cast everything in the kind of red glow that suggested either romance or impending doom, and given the station's track record, she was betting on the latter. The cargo bay doors had been forced open from the outside, metal twisted in patterns that suggested either immense strength or really advanced explosives. Inside, scattered debris formed a trail, leading to what looked like a makeshift crash site, if crashes could be artistic in their destruction. And there, in the center of the chaos, was something that made her medical training war with her survival instincts. The creature measured roughly 3 meters in length, its form a study in lethal efficiency. Chitinous plates covered most of its body, dark as the void between stars and scarred with patterns that spoke of countless battles. 6 limbs ended in what were clearly designed to be weapons, though 2 appeared to be damaged beyond immediate use. Its head, elongated and predatory, housed multiple sets of eyes that tracked her movement with the kind of intelligence that made her uncomfortably aware of how fragile her own species really was. Blood, or what passed for blood in its physiology, had pooled beneath the creature, the liquid shimmering with an almost metallic quality. One of its secondary arms hung at an impossible angle, and she could see through her scanner that its internal systems were running on emergency power. Every piece of training screamed at her to back away, called security, and let someone with bigger weapons handle the situation. This was clearly a predator, and predators didn't end up in medical stations by accident. Instead, she found herself stepping closer, medical bag in hand, because apparently 6 years of treating the galaxy's most ridiculous injuries had broken her sense of self-preservation. The creature's eyes fixed on her as she approached, multiple pupils dilating in what she hoped was recognition rather than targeting calculations. It made no move to attack, which was either a very good sign or a very bad one, depending on whether it was conserving energy for something more dramatic. "Well," she said, her voice echoing in the empty bay, "this is either going to be the most interesting medical case of my career, or the shortest remainder of my life." The creature's mandibles clicked in what might have been communication or might have been the sound of weapons preparing to fire. She chose to interpret it optimistically. Her scanner painted a picture of the creature's internal systems that would have been fascinating if it weren't so immediately life-threatening. Multiple organ failures, severe dehydration, and what appeared to be some kind of toxin working its way through its circulatory system. Whatever had brought this apex predator to her doorstep, it was dying. She knelt beside the creature, close enough now to see the intricate patterns etched into its chitinous armor. Scars, she realized. Not decorative markings, but the accumulated evidence of a lifetime spent in combat. This wasn't just a predator. It was a soldier. "Okay," she murmured, pulling out her emergency medical kit. "Let's see what we can do about this." The creature's eyes followed her every movement as she began working, but it made no attempt to stop her. If anything, it seemed to relax slightly, as if it had made some kind of decision about her intentions. Her hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to work quickly in less than ideal conditions. Hemostatic agents to stop the bleeding, broad-spectrum antibiotics to fight whatever infection was racing through its system, and a carefully calculated dose of synthetic nutrients to give its body the resources it needed to begin healing. The creature's breathing, or what passed for breathing in its physiology, grew steadier as she worked. Its eyes, which had been unfocused with pain, sharpened to track her movements with what she was beginning to recognize as curiosity rather than hostility. "There," she said, sitting back on her heels. "That should stabilize you for now, but you're going to need proper medical attention, the kind that requires equipment I don't have in my emergency kit." The creature's head tilted slightly, and she had the distinct impression it was studying her, not as prey but as something far more interesting. She should report this. Protocol demanded it. An unknown predator species on a medical station was exactly the kind of situation that required immediate escalation to security and xenobiology departments. Instead, she found herself saying, "I'll be back in a few hours to check on you. Try not to die before then." As she walked away, she could feel the creature's eyes following her, and she had the strangest sensation that she had just made a decision that would change everything. The lift carried her back to the medical bay, where the familiar routine of treating the galaxy's more mundane ailments waited. But her mind kept drifting back to the abandoned cargo bay and the apex predator she had just saved. She had no idea that in a few hours she would discover that some predators were capable of something far more dangerous than killing: loyalty. 3 days passed before she admitted to herself that sneaking medical supplies to an apex predator had become the highlight of her otherwise mundane existence. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of treating beings who complained about everything from hangnails to existential crises, she had finally found a patient who never whined, never demanded unreasonable accommodations, and had yet to threaten to file a complaint with the Galactic Medical Board. Of course, this particular patient could probably reduce her to component atoms without breaking a sweat, but she was choosing to focus on the positives. The creature, she had taken to thinking of it as the patient in her medical logs, though she suspected it would find the designation amusing if it understood the concept of irony, had made remarkable progress. What should have taken weeks of recovery had condensed into days, its physiology apparently operating on the principle that healing was just another form of warfare to be won through superior tactics and stubborn refusal to surrender. "Your cellular regeneration rate is frankly insulting to every other species I've treated," she informed it during her morning visit, running her scanner over the areas where grievous wounds had been reduced to barely visible scars. "I've got beings in the medical bay who've been growing back fingernails for 3 weeks, and you've practically regrown an entire limb." The creature's mandibles clicked in what she had learned was its version of amusement. Over the past 3 days she had begun to catalogue its various sounds and expressions, building a rudimentary understanding of its communication patterns. It was far more intelligent than she had initially assumed, not just smart for a predator, but genuinely, frighteningly intelligent. Which raised the question of what exactly it was doing crash landing on a medical station in the first place. She had tried asking, of course. The creature seemed to understand her well enough, its multiple eyes tracking her words and responding with complex patterns of clicks and whistles that suggested a sophisticated language. But without proper translation protocols, their conversations remained frustratingly one-sided. "Until today, you are not like the others," the creature said, its voice a harmonious blend of tones that somehow resolved into perfectly comprehensible standard galactic. She nearly dropped her medical scanner. "You can talk. I have always been able to communicate. I chose not to." The creature's head tilted in what she was learning to recognize as curiosity. "You continued to care for me despite receiving no acknowledgement of your efforts. This is unusual behavior for a species that prioritizes reciprocal exchanges." "Most species don't crash land in my cargo bay bleeding to death," she replied, trying to mask her surprise with professional composure. tends to alter the normal social dynamics. The creature made that clicking sound again, and she realized it was definitely amusement. You have an interesting perspective on social dynamics. Most beings would have reported my presence immediately. Most beings don't have to explain to their supervisors why they're wasting medical supplies on patients who aren't officially admitted to the facility. She sealed her medical kit and sat back on her heels. Speaking of which, I should probably ask, are you going to eat me once you're fully recovered? No. The response was immediate and definitive. You are under my protection now. The way it said protection made her skin prickle with awareness. This wasn't a casual offer of gratitude. It was a declaration spoken with the weight of absolute certainty. I didn't ask for protection, she said carefully. You did not ask to heal me either. Yet you did. The creature's secondary arms, now fully functional thanks to her ministrations, gestured in what might have been the equivalent of a shrug. Some debts transcend formal agreements. She was beginning to understand that she had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple medical emergency. What are you exactly? I mean, beyond the obvious apex predator classification. The creature was quiet for so long that she wondered if she had overstepped some boundary. When it finally spoke, its voice carried undertones of something that might have been pride, sadness, or both. I am what your databases would classify as a void hunter, the last of my kind, if current intelligence reports are accurate. Its multiple eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. We were bred for war, engineered for perfection in combat, and deployed across the galaxy as the ultimate soldiers. When the wars ended, we became inconvenient. The pieces clicked together in her mind with the unpleasant clarity of a medical diagnosis. Someone tried to eliminate you. My former handlers decided that retired weapons required proper disposal. The creature's mandibles clicked, but this time the sound held no amusement. They underestimated my unwillingness to be discarded. She found herself studying the scars that covered its chitinous armor with new understanding. Not just battle damage, evidence of betrayal, of a soldier abandoned by those who had created it for their own purposes. The wounds you arrived with, she said slowly, they weren't from combat. Poison, the creature confirmed, administered through my regular medical maintenance. They wanted it to appear as though I had simply expired from natural causes. Bastards. The word escaped before she could stop it, carrying more venom than she had intended. The creature's head tilted again, and she caught what might have been surprise in its multifaceted gaze. You seem displeased by this revelation. Of course I'm displeased. You were a soldier, and they tried to murder you rather than provide proper retirement benefits. She stood, pacing the small confines of the cargo bay. It's unconscionable from a medical ethics standpoint, and frankly offensive from a basic decency perspective. Most beings would consider my elimination a public service. Void hunters were not created to be companionable. She stopped pacing and looked at the creature. Really looked at it. Yes, it was a predator, engineered for lethality and honed by countless battles, but in the past 3 days it had been patient, curious, and apparently capable of gratitude. Whatever it had been created to be, it had somehow become something more. Most beings are idiots, she said flatly. The creature made that clicking sound again, and this time she was certain it was laughter. You are either very brave or very foolish, it said. Probably both. It's a professional hazard in my line of work. She pulled up her scanner readings, noting the continued improvement in its vital signs. You'll be fully recovered within another day or 2. What happens then? I leave. My presence here endangers you and this facility. The creature's tone was matter of fact, but she caught undertones of something that might have been regret. Those who wish me eliminated will eventually track me to this location. What if I don't want you to leave? The question surprised her as much as it did the creature. She hadn't intended to say it, but now that the words were out, she realized she meant them. You would harbor a known threat to galactic security. I would harbor a patient who hasn't completed their recovery. She crossed her arms, falling back on professional authority to mask what was becoming a disturbingly personal attachment. Besides, I'm curious about something. You said void hunters were bred for war, engineered for perfection in combat. But you've been here for 3 days, and you haven't shown the slightest aggression toward me. Either you're defective, or whoever created you built in more than they intended. The creature considered this for a long moment. We were designed to be loyal to our handlers. Perhaps that programming has transferred to me, to the being who showed mercy when it would have been safer to show fear. Before she could respond to that unsettling statement, the station's proximity alarms began wailing, a sound that meant only one thing. They had visitors. The creature's entire posture shifted, predatory instincts snapping into focus with mechanical precision. They have found me. Those who wish to complete their disposal protocols. The creature rose to its full height, and she was reminded of exactly how dangerous it truly was. You must leave, now. I'm not leaving you. You do not understand. I am about to become what I was created to be. Through the cargo bay's viewport, she could see ships approaching, sleek military vessels that radiated hostile intent. Then I guess we'll face it together, she said, surprised by her own certainty. The creature looked at her for a long moment, and when it spoke, its voice carried a note of something that might have been wonder. You truly are the most unusual being I have ever encountered. The proximity alarms continued their urgent wailing as the first boarding tubes locked onto the station's hull, and she realized that her quiet life of routine medical emergencies was about to become significantly more complicated. The universe, she reflected while crouched behind an overturned cargo container as energy blasts scorched the air above her head, had a twisted sense of humor. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been explaining to a crystalline patient why they couldn't photosynthesize their medication. Now she was playing hide-and-seek with military assassins who had graduated from the subtle as a supernova school of covert operations. The Void Hunter moved beside her with liquid grace, its form adapting to shadows in ways that made her eyes water. What had been a patient recovering from injuries was now something that belonged in nightmares, or military recruitment videos, depending on your perspective. 12 combat units, standard military configuration, the creature whispered. They are using Protocol 7, maximum lethality, minimal collateral concern. She caught a glimpse of their pursuers through gaps in the container, humanoid, heavily armored, moving with coordinated precision. They looked remarkably similar to each other, suggesting either strict uniform policy or something more disturbing. Enhanced soldiers, clone-based, genetically optimized, cybernetically augmented, the Void Hunter explained, mandibles clicking in disdain, mass-produced efficiency with all the creativity of a malfunctioning food processor. They moved deeper into the cargo bay's maze of equipment, the sound of methodical destruction following them. The creature led her to a maintenance access hidden behind a panel, revealing narrow corridors that stretched into darkness. The service corridors were a warren of pipes and conduits that kept the station functional. Emergency lighting cast everything in red, but the Void Hunter moved through the space as if designed for this environment, which, she realized, it probably had been. You've done this before, she said. Infiltration and evasion were primary training components, though usually the objective was to reach a target, not avoid one. The creature's voice carried irony. I find the role reversal educational. Behind them, metal being forcibly reconfigured suggested their pursuers had found the maintenance access. However, they are making an assumption that may prove costly, the Void Hunter continued. That assumption that I am attempting to escape. Something in its tone made her stomach clench. You're leading them somewhere. The central processing hub. It contains the station's primary power distribution network. The creature's mandibles clicked predatorily. I spent 3 days learning the station's systems while recovering. They emerged into a broader passage, seeing the entrance to the central hub ahead. Massive blast doors protecting the station's critical systems. The Void Hunter moved toward the control panel with familiar purpose. I observed you entering access codes during your shifts. Medical personnel have override access for emergencies, it explained as the doors cycled open. The central hub was a cathedral of technology, stretching through multiple levels, filled with machinery that carried enough energy to reduce most organic beings to component atoms. This seems like an excellent place to get accidentally killed, she observed. Only if you lack proper understanding of electrical systems and tactical deployment. The creature positioned itself near a primary power junction. Remain near the entrance. What follows will require precise timing. Their pursuers breached the blast doors. 12 figures in powered armor spreading through the space with military precision. Target acquired, one announced in a flat, augmented voice. Initiating termination protocol. Termination protocol, the Void Hunter repeated, its voice carrying across the hub with crystalline clarity. How disappointingly unimaginative. The soldiers swiveled toward the sound, but the creature was no longer there. It moved through the machinery like liquid shadow, using the hub's geometry to stay ahead of their targeting systems. You created us to be perfect soldiers, the Void Hunter continued from a different location. But perfection requires more than superior firepower. It requires understanding your enemy's weaknesses. She watched as the creature demonstrated why it had earned the apex predator classification. It didn't simply fight. It orchestrated destruction with symphonic precision. Each movement was part of a larger pattern that used the hub's systems as weapons. A soldier pursuing a retreating target found himself in precisely the wrong position when a power coupling overloaded. Another discovered that energy weapons and electrical shielding created fascinating feedback loops. A third learned that confidence in firepower was poor substitute for understanding tactical environments. Within minutes, coordinated military assault became a demonstration of why evolution had favored apex predators long before powered armor existed. Impressive, she said as the Void Hunter rejoined her, stepping around scattered remains of 12 enhanced soldiers. Remind me never to get on your bad side. You are incapable of being on my bad side, the creature replied matter-of-factly. You are under my protection. That status is not subject to modification. The station's emergency klaxons fell silent, replaced by gentler all-clear chimes. What happens now? The Void Hunter considered the question with careful attention. Now we discover whether the galaxy has room for a retired weapon, and the medic who refused to let it die. Looking at the creature, her patient, protector, unlikely companion, she realized that for the first time in years, she was genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. Station security arrived with the kind of cautious enthusiasm typically reserved for investigating suspicious packages that might contain either birthday presents or antimatter explosives. Commander Thross, a cetacean whose species had evolved from aquatic mammals but retained an unfortunate tendency toward bureaucratic anxiety, surveyed the central hub's destruction with the expression of someone calculating how much paperwork this would generate. 12 enhanced soldiers, he said, his translator rendering his sonar-based speech into flat, disapproving standard galactic. Eliminated by what, exactly? She glanced at the Void Hunter, who had somehow managed to position itself in the shadows between functional lighting panels, becoming nearly invisible despite its considerable size. Equipment malfunction, power surge, you know how these old stations can be. Equipment malfunction, Commander Thross repeated, his tone suggesting he found this explanation roughly as believable as a gelatinoid claiming to be lactose intolerant. That resulted in 12 bodies with wounds consistent with precision combat engagement. Very sophisticated equipment malfunction. The Void Hunter's mandibles clicked softly, barely audible, but she caught the sound of suppressed amusement. Even in the aftermath of lethal combat, the creature seemed to find humor in bureaucratic absurdity. I'm going to need a full report, Commander Thross continued, then paused as his scanner registered something in the shadows. And I'm going to need to know why there's a Class Alpha Predator hiding behind the primary power coupling. Medical patient, she said promptly. Recovering from severe injuries, still quite fragile. The Void Hunter stepped into the light with fluid grace, its form somehow managing to appear both magnificent and completely harmless. This was impressive, considering it was standing in the middle of what looked like a small battlefield. But the creature had apparently mastered the art of looking innocent while surrounded by evidence of its own lethality. Fragile, Commander Thross said, his voice climbing into registers that suggested his species' sonar was having difficulty processing the concept. This is a Void Hunter, retired, the creature said, its harmonious voice carrying undertones of polite correction. And under medical supervision, retired, a Void Hunter, retired. The commander's translator began emitting small sparks, apparently overwhelmed by the logical inconsistencies it was being asked to process. These things happen, she said helpfully. Career transitions can be difficult. That's why I recommend comprehensive medical support during the adjustment period. Commander Thross looked between her and the Void Hunter, his expression cycling through several stages of bureaucratic despair, before settling on the kind of resignation that came from years of dealing with situations that defied both logic and proper filing protocols. "The 12 bodies," he said finally. "Self-defense," the Void Hunter replied with perfect equanimity. "They initiated hostile action against my medical provider. This was unacceptable. Medical provider, being responsible for my continued existence. Harming her would have been counterproductive to my recovery." She watched Commander Thross process this information with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for diffusing explosives. The concept of a Void Hunter developing protective instincts toward a medical professional was apparently challenging several fundamental assumptions about predator behavior. "I see," the commander said slowly. "And you are under her care. This arrangement appears to be mutually beneficial." Commander Thross turned to her with the expression of someone who had just realized his paperwork was going to require entirely new categories. "Doctor, I need to ask, are you planning to keep it?" She looked at the Void Hunter, who regarded her with multifaceted eyes that somehow managed to convey both lethal capability and something that might have been hope. The creature that had been engineered as the perfect weapon, discarded when it became inconvenient, and had somehow developed the capacity for loyalty toward the one being who had shown it mercy. "I prefer to think of it as a professional consultation arrangement," she said. "Long-term care for a patient with unique requirements, and the patient agrees to this arrangement." The Void Hunter's mandibles clicked in what she now recognized as its version of a smile. "I find the terms acceptable. The medical care is exemplary, and the company is educational." Commander Thross stared at them both for a long moment, then activated his communicator with the air of someone who had given up on logic entirely. "Good station, Command, this is security. We're going to need a new classification for companion animals, possibly armed ones. And someone needs to explain to the Galactic Medical Board why our Chief Medical Officer has adopted what appears to be a semi-domesticated apex predator." "Domesticated is a strong word," the Void Hunter said mildly. "I prefer selectively social." She found herself laughing. Actually laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The sound echoed through the damaged hub, mixing with the creature's harmonic clicking and Commander Thross' sonar-based muttering about impossible paperwork. 3 days ago she had been a medical officer, treating routine injuries in the galaxy's most boring assignment. Now she was apparently the primary caregiver for a retired weapon of mass destruction who had decided she was worth protecting. The universe definitely had a sense of humor, and for the first time in years, she was looking forward to finding out what the punchline would be.